Hi everybody, welcome to the explanation for the science practice test from the Barron's textbook, test number 1. Let's have a look together. Now, really important is not just memorizing answers or even just finding out what the right answer was. The really important thing from this video is to number 1, review all the different subject areas, and number 2, to learn that process of trying to find the right answer. You are always going to be faced with some new topics in your exam. The key is not to worry. If you see something new, just use the skills that you have to try to find the right answers. So question 1. The question says, according to the information above, what happened in the Great Lakes during the 1940s and 1950s? The options: the lake trout began to feed on the sea lampreys instead of alewives. This reduced the sea lamprey population and the alewife population grew as a result. So the lake trout began to feed on the sea lampreys. B. The alewives began to feed on the sea lampreys. C. The sea lampreys began to feed on the lake trout. Or D. The alewives began to feed on the lake trout. So these 4 answers are all very different. They're all talking about the food relationship between 2 types of fish. But which one began to eat which one? So let's look at the passage. Now that we know what we're looking for, we can read the passage thinking about the 1940s and the 1950s. So when a new species becomes established in an ecosystem, it can often disrupt the existing relationships between the predators and their prey. A new species, that's an invasive species. Okay, you might see that word before, invasive species. So a type of organism that did not live there before. A new species may outcompete an existing predator for food. Sources and habitat or an existing predator can become prey for the new species. One of the most well-documented ecological impacts of a species invasion was that of the sea lamprey in the Great Lakes. The sea lamprey in the Great Lakes, which devastated the lake trout fishery. Okay. Now, the sea lamprey invaded the Great Lakes. The lake trout was devastated, almost destroyed, during the 1940s and 1950s. As the native predator became prey to the invasive sea lampreys, populations of fish like the alewife multiplied out of control. So before, we can say that the lake trout was the predator and the alewife was the prey. But later the lamprey ate the lake trout, and so the alewife grew because there were less predators. But this is that the sea lamprey began to feed on the lake trout. So the lake trout was reduced, and the alewife grew because there were less predators trying to eat it. So C is the correct answer. Number 2. Select the word or phrase in each bracket that correctly completes the sentence. So it's important when we see a graph to look at the title. This is the geyser eruptions. Eruptions might be an earthquake. We can see the duration time and we can see the waiting time. And for the first 2 options, the first drop-down menu had short, both long and short, even and equal, and the second drop-down menu had short, long, long and short, and equal. So most eruptions occur with either. Now, if you look at the graph, where do most of the eruptions occur? Well, a lot of the eruptions are down here, and a lot of the eruptions are up here. So if we take this section of the graph, they have short duration and short wait time, or they have a long duration and a long wait time. So most eruptions occur either, now we're looking for the duration, so we should have the word short, a short duration. After now waiting time is also short, after short wait times. Or, if we look at this section of the graph up here, we'll be looking for something that says long durations and long wait times. Okay. So when you look in the graph, something like this, you're comparing where are most of the eruptions. Each one of these dots is one single eruption. But we can see a group down here, and we can see a group over here. So most of them have short duration and short wait time, or long duration and long wait time. We don't see many eruptions in the middle. Next, select the word or phrase in each bracket that correctly completes each sentence. Short eruptions tended to last. Now the options are less than, between, more than, or as long as. So 20 seconds, but, and then we have less than, between, more than, and as long as. So short eruptions are those eruptions that are happening down here. Tend means normally, not always, but normally. So most of the eruptions are more than 20 seconds. Most of them are less than 60 seconds. So for the first one, we would say more than. And then for the second one, we would say less than. We have 3 more spaces in this question, and everyone has the drop-down box with the same options: less than, between, more than, and as long as. So long eruptions next. Long eruptions tend to last, so normally last. So we're looking at this group of eruptions here. If we go down, we can go down like this. But do be careful. This question is a little bit tricky, not because of the science, it's a little bit tricky because of the English. So the 160 is coming first and the 120 is coming second. So we are normally less than 160, we're normally more than 120. So less than 160 seconds, but more than 120 seconds. And then finally, very few eruptions last. Now we have 60 and 120. So from 60 to 120 is here. So very few eruptions last between 60 and 120. So in many ways, this is more of an English question. Do you know the difference between more than, less than? Can you use between? But you are looking at the graph, you are looking at the trend, you're trying to group the data so that you can see where do the majority of the earthquakes occur. Next question. We have the options of January, February, November, and December. And the question is, which month has the greatest range between the record low and the record high temperatures? The range means the smallest take away the biggest. So we need to look at the key. The record high will be the dark blue circle, and the record low will be the light square. So here is the record low, and here is the record high. We don't need to look at the average temperature in the middle. And we don't need to look at all of the months. We're looking at January, February, November, and December. So, in January, the highest was 72, the lowest was -6. 72 minus -6 gives you a range of 78 for January. For February, the highest was 75 and the lowest was -15. So 75 minus -15 gives you a difference of 90. Then November, the highest temperature was 84. The lowest temperature was 7. So 84 minus 7 gives you a range of 77 degrees. And then finally, we come to December, which had the record high of 75 and the record low of -13. So 75 minus -13 gives you 88. So the correct answer would be February. February has the biggest range. The only way to answer this question is to work out the range for each of the 4 months in the answers. Now, according to the passage, which of the following is not a greenhouse gas? Carbon dioxide, water vapor, carbon monoxide, or ozone? So the temperature of the Earth is regulated by a relationship between the sun, the surface of the Earth, and the Earth's atmosphere. So the temperature is controlled by energy that comes from the sun, how much is absorbed by the surface of the Earth, and how much is absorbed by the atmosphere. Energy in the form of solar radiation, that's sunlight, travels from the sun to the Earth. A portion of this energy is reflected away, either by the sun's atmosphere or the surface, but roughly half of the energy is absorbed by the surface of the Earth and converted into infrared, that is heat energy. This heat energy is then released back into the atmosphere. A large portion of that energy is emitted through the atmosphere into space, but a smaller portion is absorbed by the chemicals in the atmosphere, which are known as greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases are those gases that absorb the heat that is released by the Earth. As these gases absorb heat, they cause an increase in the atmospheric temperature. Without greenhouse gases, the Earth would be a lot colder and unable to support many of its current forms of life. Now, key, greenhouse gases include water vapor, that's a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, that's a greenhouse gas, methane, but methane's not included in this list, and ozone, so that's a greenhouse gas. The only one that is not included is carbon monoxide. Remember, carbon dioxide is CO2. Carbon monoxide is CO. The dioxide means 2 atoms of oxygen. The mon means 1 atom of oxygen. Based on the passage, all of the following are true except water vapor is a more significant factor in warming than carbon dioxide. Methane is a less significant factor in warming than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a more significant factor in warming than ozone. Or methane is a more significant factor in warming than ozone. So the most significant greenhouse gas is water vapor. So water vapor is more significant than all of the others. This one is true. So it cannot be the right answer. Water vapor absorbs the majority of the global heat emissions absorbed by the atmosphere. Research data suggests that the absorption capacity of water vapor in the atmosphere increases as the atmospheric temperature increases. The second most significant greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. So methane is less important than carbon dioxide. This is true. Carbon dioxide is more important than ozone. This is true. Carbon dioxide is the second most important gas? Now, we don't know how important methane is. We don't know how important ozone is. We do know that the most important is water vapor, and the second most important is carbon dioxide. So D cannot be proven. D would be not given based on this passage. It would not be true based on this passage. So the correct answer is D. Whenever you get a question that says all of the following are true except, then you are trying to find one answer that is either false or is not supported by the passage. What is the most likely effect of an increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere? An increase in the concentration of water vapor, an increase in the concentration of methane, an increase in the absorption capacity of water vapor, or an increase in the absorption capacity of the ozone. So the second most significant greenhouse gas in terms of the warming effect is carbon dioxide. As the concentration of carbon dioxide increases, it absorbs increasing amounts of heat, contributing to an increase in the atmospheric temperature. Now, this is a very tricky question to answer. You have to take two parts. As the CO2 increases, there is an increase in the atmospheric temperature. That's the first thing that you need to see. The second thing that you need to see is that as the temperature increases, the absorption capacity of water vapor also increases. Now we need to join these two together. So if the temperature is higher, water vapor can absorb more heat. If there is more CO2, then water vapor can absorb more heat. So if the CO2 increases, then the temperature will increase and the water vapor will be able to increase the amount of absorption that it has. So it is an increase in the absorption capacity of water vapor in the atmosphere. And we get this by joining those two sentences together. Now, an element's atomic number describes the number of protons in the atomic nucleus of the element. The number of particles in the nucleus of an atom is positively correlated to its atomic weight. A portion of the periodic table is shown below. So we have the atomic number, which is the number of protons, and it is also the number of electrons. But there is a positive correlation. That means when one increases, the other one also increases. So if you increase the atomic number, you also increase the atomic weight. They both increase together. So which one has the smallest atomic weight? Well, which one has the smallest atomic number? The answer is nitrogen. So we are looking for answer A. Now we're on to a Punnett square. Punnett square, remember, is used for genetics. The Punnett square shows a genetic cross. If the cross produces 20 offspring, how many will likely to be homozygotic? Now, you can have two types of homozygotic. You can have homozygotic dominant, where there are two dominant alleles, or you can have the homozygotic recessive, where you have two recessive alleles. So if we look here, the first one, this is homozygotic. There are two dominant alleles. The second one is also homozygotic. The two below, these are heterozygotic. They have one dominant and one recessive allele. So 50% are homozygotic. So if there are 20 offspring, 50% of 20 will equal 10. 10 of the children are likely be homozygotic. Remember, a Punnett square shows you the percentages. So there is a 50% chance that it will be 2 dominant alleles. There is a 50% chance that there will be 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele. There would be a 0% chance of the homozygotic recessive, 2 small recessive alleles. According to the diagram, what is the probability that an offspring will show the recessive trait? Now, if you are homozygotic dominant, then you show the dominant trait. If you are heterozygotic, because you have 1 dominant, 1 strong allele, and 1 recessive, 1 weak allele, the dominant trait will still be shown. The only way to show the recessive trait is if you have 2 recessive alleles. So, although these 2 here will be carrying the recessive allele, they can pass it on to their offspring. They will not be showing the recessive trait because they have 1 dominant trait which will overpower that recessive trait. So the chance that they will show the recessive trait is 0% because all of them will get at least 1 dominant allele from the female who only carries dominant alleles. Continuing with this, which of the following is the most likely distribution of offspring from a cross between a heterozygotic parent and a second heterozygotic parent? Now, we cannot look at this because this parent is not big G, small g. So we should really draw our own Punnett square. So each parent has 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele. So for the first one, they will get the dominant allele from both the mother and the father. The next one will get 1 dominant allele and they will carry 1 recessive allele. The same for down here. They will get 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele. The final will get 2 recessive alleles. So now that we have our Punnett square, we can read the question again. Which of the following is the most likely distribution of the offspring between a cross between 2 heterozygotic parents? Well, we have 1 homozygotic dominant, we have 2 heterozygotic, and we have 1 homozygotic recessive. So all will not be heterozygotic, and all will not be homozygotic. Half will be heterozygotic. Heterozygotic is the big G, small g, which is true. Half will be homozygotic. Well, homozygotic can be homozygotic dominant, or it could be homozygotic recessive. And that's true. So C is the correct answer. For D, 1/4 will be heterozygotic and 3/4 will be homozygotic. It's not true. Half of them will have a dominant allele and carry the recessive allele. Half of them, 50%, will be heterozygotic. When you get a question like this, where you're asked to imagine what will happen between 2 parents, I strongly recommend that you draw a Punnett square, that you put 1 parent at the top and 1 parent at the side, and then you work out the probability for each of their offspring. If you do like that, you should be able to get the right answer. And again, continuing with genetics, you might find this quite difficult, but I really encourage you to spend some time on this because these type of questions come up certainly in every practice paper that I've seen. And I guess that because they come up so often in the practice papers, they will also be coming up in the real exam. So an organism's phenotype describes the outward appearance of a genetic trait. So the phenotype is what you can see. So there would be two types of phenotype. They have the trait or they do not have the trait. The genotype would be the type of genes. There would be three types of genotypes: dominant homozygotic, recessive homozygotic, and heterozygotic. So the phenotype is what is showing. If the dominant allele, G, carries the trait for yellow in pea plants, what percentage of the offspring from a dominant, a homozygotic, and a recessive homozygotic cross will have the yellow phenotype? So again, for this type of question, we should be drawing out a Punnett square. So one parent is dominant homozygotic. The other parent is homozygotic recessive. So actually every child will get the same genes. They will get a dominant gene from one parent and they will get a recessive gene from the other parent. So all of the children will have the dominant genes, so they will all show yellow color. All of them will be carrier for the green color, but all of them will show the yellow color. So the answer is D, 100%. Now, which characteristic of a scientific theory is demonstrated by Einstein's theory as described in the passage above? It predicted and explained scientific findings that took place after the theory was first expressed. It defined a relation that is very difficult to perceive, difficult to understand. It involved a lot of refined observation, or it provided a broad explanation that applies to many large subjects related to the natural world. So, as summarized by an American astronomer, Professor Henry Norris Russell of Princeton, in the Scientific American for November 29, Einstein's contribution amounts to this: the central fact which has been proved, and which is of great interest and importance, is that natural phenomena, things that we can see, involving gravitation and inertia, such as the motion of the planets, and phenomena involving electricity and magnetism, including the motion of light, are not independent of one another, but are intimately related. So these two things are joined together, so that both sets of phenomena should be regarded as parts of one vast system, embracing all of nature. The relation of the two is, however, of such a character that is perceptible in only a few instances and then only to refined observation. Now, it does talk about only refined observations, but that is not the idea of a scientific theory. Things that are difficult to perceive, difficult to understand, well, it does involve electricity, which is difficult to understand. It involves the movement of planets, which are also difficult to understand. But that's not the main definition of a theory. Predicting something that would take place in the future, this passage does not include anything that would take place later. The passage does talk about the broad explanation. So they are not independent, they are intimately related. This is the explanation. And it does talk about large subjects. We're talking about gravitation and inertia of the planets and electricity and magnetism. These are large areas. And then the natural world, well, it does talk about embracing all of nature. It's quite a difficult question, but D is the best answer. Which of the following would most negatively affect the total population of all the groups in the food chain described in the passage? A disease that kills the grass and other plants, a disease that paralyzes the mice, paralyzed means cannot move, a disease that prevents the snakes from digesting meat, or a disease that causes blindness in eagles. So all living things require energy to survive, and this energy is usually contained in the food that a living thing eats. The simple food chain, which we can see down here very small, shows the relationship between producers and consumers as well as the flow of energy between different members of the food chain. Light energy from the sun is captured by the plants through photosynthesis and is transferred up the food chain. Now, if the producer is creating the energy, if the grass is creating the energy, if a disease kills all of the green plants, then there will be nothing to capture the sunlight. There will be nothing to produce food. So every other animal would be affected. Everything that eats the grass would have no food. Everything that then eats those things would also have no food. So A is the best answer. The other options are options that affect higher levels of the food chain. The mice would be a primary consumer. The snake would eat the mice. The eagle would eat the snake. So if something affects the eagles, only the eagle population would be affected. If something killed the snakes, then the snakes and the eagles would be affected, but not the mice. But if something kills the grass, everything would be affected because everything depends on the producers. Which invasive species would be the least disruptive to this food chain? So a non-native rodent that eats the grass, that would go in at a low level. A non-native owl that eats the mice, that would mean there would be less food available for the snakes, so there would be less snakes alive. Then that would mean there would be less food for the eagles. A non-native weasel that eats the snakes, if they eat the snakes, then there's less food available for the eagle. A non-native bird of prey that eats the eagles, well, this would only affect the eagles. So D would be the best answer. If you're wanting the least disruption to a food chain, then the higher level that you affect, the less disruption you'll have. If you eat more eagles, then there's going to be less effect for the lower levels of the food chain. Now, herbivores are animals that eat plants. Carnivores are animals that eat other animals. There are also omnivores. Omnivores eat everything. Based on the information in the passage, which of the following is true? All consumers are carnivores. Is that true? Well, primary consumers eat producers. So that is false. Some consumers are carnivores and some are plants. Well, plants are producers. Plants are producers. But animals are consumers. Plants produce their own energy. On the other hand, animals need to eat other organisms to get their energy. So some consumers, secondary consumers, eat primary consumers. That's true. And tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. So consumers are carnivores. That first part is true. And some are plants. That is false. And based on this passage, it is false. You probably know about the Venus flytrap. There are a few plants that do eat animals, but that's not based on this passage. That would be based on your own knowledge. C, some producers are plants and some are carnivores. Well, if we look at the beginning, light energy from the sun is captured by plants. Photosynthesis is transferred up the food chain. Okay, so producers capture the energy from the sun. Producers are plants. Producers are not carnivores. This is false. D, some consumers are herbivores and some are carnivores. Well, yes, primary consumers eat plants. They eat producers, so they are herbivores. And then secondary consumers eat the primary consumers and tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. So some are carnivores. So the correct answer is D. The energy that flows through a food chain begins with the producers. According to the information in the passage, how does the producer acquire the energy it supplies to the food chain? Well, light energy from the sun is captured by plants through photosynthesis and transferred up the food chain. We can actually see that key word. It supplies to the food chain and it transfers up the chain. So these two bits link together. And capture and acquire. Again, these are two words that have a similar thing. So we should be looking for an answer about the sun, about light energy. The grass absorbs fossil fuels. Fossil fuel, the grass takes in coal and charcoal? No. The grass absorbs heat in the air through its blades in the leaves. Heat could be coming from the sun, possibly. The grass creates energy, creates the energy. We should know that energy is never created or destroyed. It only transfers. D, the grass absorb light from the sun. So you might think that B and D are very similar. We have one about absorbing heat energy, and we have one about absorbing light energy. But the passage says light energy. So the correct answer is D. Many people argue that humans are the top predator in virtually all food chains. Humans eat basically everything and not many animals eat humans. Based on the information in the passage, which of the following statements best supports this view? Some predators, like bears, wolves, and sharks, eat humans. Well, if they eat humans, humans would not be the top. And we are looking for something that will support the view, not contradict the view. So we can take away answer A. Technology enables humans to use almost any existing top predator as a food source. That would be possible. Humans consume large amounts of grain, fruit, and vegetables, but the top predator would be a tertiary predator that eats other animals. So it will not be C. Humans raise animals like cows and chickens to provide food like eggs and milk. Well, let's look at the final paragraph, the top predator, because that links to the top predator phrase in the question. The top predator in a food chain refers to the consumer that has no natural predator, so nothing eats it. In the example in the previous page, the eagle is the top predator. An invasive species is something that enters the ecosystem and competes for food with the species that are already present, disrupting the existing food chains. So if something comes in, then it starts competition that was not there before. Invasive species are often new top predators because they have no natural predators, since competition for their sources of food will increase. For example, if a new species of bird that fed primarily on snakes, the population of eagles would decrease as the eagles faced new competition for their food source of snakes. In some cases, the former top predator, which will reduce the population of the previous top predator. So in some cases, they will eat the old predator. Now, technology enables humans to use top predators as a food source. So if the top predator becomes a food source, then that means that the humans are using their technology to take the highest position in the food chain. Answer is B. Now, for this question, we're going back to genetics. And we need to drag and drop these into the correct place. You can use these more than once. So we have the dominant, and the dominant are the Y and the Y. So that needs to go here. We will have a Y, and then we'll have G. So we need a Y and a G to go here. And the same on the top row in position number 2. We get the Y and we get the G. So we also need to put this into this position. The last one, number 4, we'll be taking the small g and the small g. So we need to move this box into this position. Now, when you are doing this on Moodle, like when you're doing these practice exams, be careful where you put the box. This circle here shows you the position. So this circle would need to be inside this box. It's not this bit, it's the circle. This is like your aiming key. Imagine you're looking, I don't know, through a gun, through a scope to shoot. You would use that circle to aim. So that circle needs to go into here. And that means that you will get the mark. If you don't get it in the correct place, then you might lose the mark because Moodle will not understand. If that circle was here on the line or above, then Moodle would think that the answer was wrong. It's not that difficult in the real GED exam. There are only certain spaces on the screen where you can put answers. So in the real GED exam, it's easier to get things in the correct place. But in the Moodle, the computer system is a little bit sensitive. So you need to be careful where you drop the boxes. Now, this next group of questions is based on the table, and it's all mathematical based. It's very important to read the questions carefully. In this one, you're asked for the entire 15-day period. So you're looking at the whole of the table. But sometimes you'll be asked for 5 days or 6 days or 10 days, but you need to read the question. We're looking at the entire 15-day period. And we're looking at the mean. You will get 2 or 3 math questions in your science exam. So make sure you know the difference between mean, mode, and median. Mean is where you add them all together. The mode is the most common, and the median is if you put them in order from the smallest to the biggest, which one is left in the middle. So for this one, we're looking at the mean, and we're looking at precipitation. So we find precipitation in the table, and it's this column here. So we need to add together all these numbers, and then we have to divide by 15. If you add together all of the numbers, you will get 45.29. If you then divide that by 15, you get 3.019. Now we need to go to the nearest millimeter. So we can forget about this. 0 would round down, so the answer will be 3. I have seen people fail the exam by 1 or 2 marks, and they came out of the exam saying they got confused between the mean and the median. So do make sure you know the difference between mean, mode, and median. The next question, what is the median daily precipitation? So again, we're looking at precipitation, and we're looking for the median. If we have 15, and we go from 1 to 15, we're looking for number 8. There will be 7 that are lower, and there will be 7 that are higher. You can write all of these out, or you can do it a different way. So the lowest one is 0, so we take that away. The highest one is 22, so we take that away. That will be number 1, that will be number 15. The next lowest is also 0, so we take away 0, that is number 2. The next highest would be 9.09, so that would be number 14. The next lowest would still be 0, so that's number 3. The next highest is 8.62, so that is number 13. The next lowest is still 0, so that is number 4. The next highest would be 1.32, so that's number 12. The next lowest is still 0, so that is number 5. The next highest would be, oh sorry, we've missed one, but 2. 2 would be number 12. This one would be number 11. The next lowest is 0 still, so that's number 6. And let's look at the highest. That would be 0.91, so that would be number 10. The next lowest, what do we have left? We have 0.5, we have 0.2, and we have 0.54. So the next lowest would be 0.2, that's number 7. The next highest would be 0.54, so that's number 9. So the one that is left in the middle is 0.5. So the answer is B. In the exam, you might want to copy all these out on your whiteboard and then take them away highest and lowest. Then what is the mode of the precipitation? So the mode is the most common. We can see 0, 0, 0, and 0. 0 is there 6 times. So the answer is A. And then we're asked, what is the approximate range of the sunlight? So we need to look at the sunlight. We need to find the lowest, and we need to find the highest. So we can go down 7,300, 22,000, 23,000, 5,000, 13,000, 15,000, 18,000, 23,000, 20,000, 22,000, 10,000, 16,000, 11,000, 20,000, and 25,000. The highest one is 25,218. We're asked for the approximate range, so we can just make it 25,000. The lowest was the first one, the 7,390. Again, we are looking at the approximate range. Sorry, not 7,000. The lowest is 5,846. So 5,846 is almost 6,000. So 25,000 minus 6,000 gives us an answer that is 19,000. So the correct answer is answer D. Which of the following best describes the correlation between the daily precipitation and the daily sunlight? So let's look at the highest. Let's take 3 of the highest. We can see on 25,000 there is 0 precipitation. We can see on 23,000 there is 0 precipitation. And again on 23,000 there is 0 precipitation. So on 3 of the days where there is the highest amount of sunlight, there is the lowest amount of precipitation. Now, let's look at the lowest ones. On the day when there was only 5,800 sunlight, there was 22 daily precipitation. And when it was 7,000, there was 8.62 daily precipitation. So we can see that when the sunlight is high, the daily precipitation is low. When the daily sunlight is low, the daily precipitation is high. So they are opposites. When you have one high linked to one low and one low linked to one high, this is opposites. Opposites always show you a negative correlation. If they are both high together and both low together, then you would have a positive correlation. No correlation would mean that there's no link. But we can see that the 2 days with the lowest amount of sunlight, there was the highest amount of precipitation. And the days where there was the highest amount of sunlight, there was the lowest amount of precipitation. A kilojoule, kJ, is equal to 1000 joules. Which of the following correctly represents the average daily sunlight on April 5 in joules? So April 5 is here. So April 5 is 13,870.4 kilojoules. We can see kilojoules, but 1 kJ is equal to 1000 joules, and we are asked for the answer in joules. So we need to multiply this by 1000. So we need to move the decimal point 1, 2, 3. And so we get an answer 13,870,400 joules. But we are asked for the answer in scientific notation. Scientific notation always means that there is one number before the decimal point. So now we need to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have an answer that is 1.38704 times 10 to the power 7. So the correct answer is B. In the study above, what is the independent variable? Now, remember, the independent variable is the thing that the scientist or the experimenter changes. The dependent variable is the thing that changes automatically. So we have the location of the greenhouse, the amount of sunlight, the growth rate of the oranges, of the species of the orange tree. A botanist wanted to study the effects of sunlight or sunlight hours on the rate of growth of orange. He planted an orange tree in each of 3 greenhouses that are adjacent to each other on a large open lot. He set the greenhouse skylights so that one tree got 12 hours of sunlight per day, one tree got 8 hours of sunlight per day, and one tree got 4 hours of sunlight per day. Then he measured the diameter of each orange. He measured the growth. So the growth of the orange would be the dependent variable. The location of the greenhouse is controlled. All the greenhouses are next to each other. What he is changing is the amount of sunlight, 12 hours, 8 hours, or 4 hours. Presumably, the window at the top has a cover over it, so he can control how many hours of sunlight each greenhouse receives. He is changing the amount of sunlight. So B is the independent variable. This is really important to know, and we've done a few experiments. Do go back to your notes because this type of question is going to come up in your exam. Now, atoms consist of 3 types of particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons have a positive electrical charge, and electrons have a negative electrical charge. Neutrons are neutral, so they have no charge. When the number of protons in an atom is equal to the number of electrons, there is a balance. So we can see number 1. There is 1 positive proton, there is 1 negative electron, so there is a balance. Plus 1 minus 1 gives us 0. When the number of protons is not equal to the number of electrons, the atom is called an ion and it has an electrical charge. It's an ion because it either gained or it lost electrons. So if the number of protons is greater than the number of electrons, then it is positive. So look at number 2. 11 protons, only 10 electrons. This has a charge of plus 1. When the number of electrons is greater than the atom, then it has a negative charge. So for example, we can see 17 positive and 18 minus. So this would have a charge of -1. And number 3, 14 and 15. 14 is plus, 15 is minus. This would also have a charge of -1. For the last one, 19 plus, 19 minus, this would have no charge. So select the word or phrase in each bracket that correctly completes each sentence. Atoms 3 and 4 are something to form an ionic bond because they have something electrical charges. Now, going back to the passage. Ions of opposing charge can attract each other, and so they can make ionic bonds. So the plus and the negative attract. Opposites always attract. Atom 3 and atom 4 are both negative. So atom 3 and atom 4 are not able to form an ionic bond because they have negative, or because they have the same electrical charges. Next question continues. I've just wrote the options here this time so you can see. Atom 2 is a neutral ion. Well, ions are either positive or they are negative. It cannot be neutral. If it's neutral, then it's just an atom. If it's not an ion is possible, but let's look at atom 2. There are 11 positive protons, there are 10 negative electrons. So this would have a +1 charge. So the number of protons and number of electrons is different. So this is an ion. Is it positive or negative? It's got a +1 charge. So this is a positive ion. Why? Well, if we compare the number of protons and the number of electrons, the protons is 11, the electrons is 10. So it has a greater number of protons compared to the number of electrons. Again, I've put the options above for you. So complete the sentence. Atoms, we've got to choose 2 atoms, are able to form an ionic bond. So which ones can form ionic bonds? Well, those that have opposite charges. So when one is positive and one is negative, they can attract each other. Okay, opposing charges can attract each other. So let's go back. Atom 1 has 0 charge. Atom 2 is a +1. Atom 3 is a -1. Atom 4 is a -1. Atom 5 is 0. So if there's no charge, it cannot be an ion. So any answer that has 1 or 5 can be removed. So the options are 2 and 4 or 3 and 4. Well, 3 and 4 are both negative. 2 is positive. So 2 and 4 can make a bond because 2 is positive and it is attracted to the negative number 4. So they have opposing electrical charges. If they have the same charge, they repel, they will not make a bond. And so for the last one, we need to put these atoms into the correct boxes. So number 1 is +1, -1, so it's got no charge. So number 1 goes into the neutral box. Number 2, +11, -10, so a +1 charge. So number 2 would go into the positive box. Number 3, +14, -15, so this would be -1. So number 3 will go into the negative box. Number 4, +17, -18, this would be a -1. So number 4 will also go into the negative box. And then number 5, 19 plus, 19 minus, 0 charge. Number 5 will go into the neutral box. Now, all of the following statements are true about boron except. So for boron, we are looking at this box here. Boron's first electric shell can hold a maximum of 2 electrons. Boron's atomic number is less than 18. Boron has 5 electrons. Boron has 3 electronic shells. So in the table above, there is selected information from the periodic table of elements. Valence electrons are electrons in the atom's outermost electronic shell, called a valence shell. The periods refer to the number of electron shells present in an atom of a given type. So hydrogen and helium, they only have one shell. The first electron shell can have a maximum of 2 electrons. So boron's first shell can have a maximum of 2 electrons. This is true. All first shells can have a maximum of 2 electrons. For atoms with more than one shell, the valence can hold a maximum of 8 electrons. So for period 2, there will be 2 shells. For boron, the atomic number is 5, so that means that there will be 5 electrons. Electron is equal to the atomic number. The protons and the electrons are always the same. So we will have 5 electrons in the first shell, and then we'll have 3 more electrons in the second shell. So boron has 5 electrons. This is true. Boron's atomic number is less than 18. Well, the atomic number is shown at the top. So boron's atomic number is 5. 5 is less than 18. So this is true. Boron has 3 shells, but boron is in the second period. And it says the period refers to the number of electron shells. So boron has 2 electron shells, not 3 electron shells. So D is the correct answer. Remember, we are looking for the answer that is not true. Which of the following is true about phosphorus? So this time we're looking at phosphorus. If you find it in the table, it is here. It's got an atomic number of 15, so there will be 15 electrons. It's in the third period, so there will be 3 valence shells. 5 electrons is not true. It must have 15. It has fewer valence electrons than chlorine. Well, chlorine has 17 and phosphorus only has 15. So this is true. It does have fewer than chlorine. So B looks like the correct answer. It has more electron shells than chlorine, but chlorine and phosphorus are both in the third period. They both have 3 electron shells. So this is false. They have the same number. And it has 2 electron shells. It's in the third period, so it's got 3 electron shells. Select the word or phrase from each menu to complete the gaps. Now the first 2 gaps, both times you have the same options: greater, lesser, equal, or uneven. The last one, you have electrons, valence electrons, protons, and electron shells. So silicon, let's find silicon on here. Silicon is here, number 14. And silicon has what number of electron shells than oxygen? Oxygen is here. So oxygen has 2 shells and silicon has 3 shells. So silicon has a greater number of electron shells than oxygen. And now we're going to compare to sulfur. Sulfur is here. Sulfur has 16 electrons, silicon has 14 electrons, and lesser number of valence electrons than sulfur. Hydrogen and helium have an equal number of what? So electrons, but they would have, hydrogen would have 1 electron, helium would have 2 electrons. So it cannot be electrons, and it cannot be valence electrons. Protons, well, the proton is the same as the number of electrons. So hydrogen has 1 proton, helium has 2 protons. So it's not going to be protons either. Electron shells, well, hydrogen and helium are the only 2 elements that appear in the first period. So the correct answer is electron shells. Finally, write the name of the element that has 2 electron shells and 4 valence electrons. So, firstly, the 2 electron shells. 2 electron shells are going to be here. So we can only be looking at this middle row from the table. Valence electrons, remember, are the electrons in the atom's outermost shell. All of them will have 2 electrons in the first shell. So lithium would have 2 electrons in the first shell and 1 valence electron. Beryllium would have 2 valence electrons. So we want 4 valence electrons. It's going to be carbon. Carbon would have 2 electrons in the first shell, and then it will have 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons in the outer shell. And if we add those together, we get 6 electrons. The atomic number is 6, so that is why the answer is carbon. Do make sure of your spelling. If you ever get asked to write a word in the gap, you must spell the word correctly, otherwise the computer will mark your answer wrong. Okay, that's the end of this explanation video. Hopefully this has helped you to review how to find the right answer and the process to find the answer. First you look at the options, then you try to find keywords in the passage. If you can find answers that are wrong, then you are more likely to get the correct answer. O să lăsai, Coda.